It's time that I make my long-awaited journey back into the eerie world of Resident Evil Village. If you've seen my in-depth retrospective of the game I did last October, you would know that it's one of my favorites in the RE series. But since I released that video, there has been DLC added to the game, most notably the Winters expansion in late 2022. Now this expansion included a few different things, but all I care about discussing is its story add-on entitled Shadows of Rose, set after the events of the main narrative, that has you play as Rose Winters, the adorable little baby you saved at the end of Village by defeating the evil, manipulative witch, Mother Miranda. Shadows of Rose takes place 16 years after the demise of Miranda and the destruction of the Megamycete, the giant root that acted as the core hive mind of the mold fungus. Rose, now a teenager, has become a social outcast due to her powers associated with the Megamycete, which cause the veins in her body to glow whenever they are activated. Though she had been raised by her loving mother, Mia, for several years, she would eventually be placed under the protective custody of Chris Redfield, who would attempt to recruit her into his Hound Wolf squad and help Rose control her powers. Rose would meet with one of the squad members, Charlie Graham, codenamed Canine, in a park where he informs her that there may be a way to get rid of her powers. A surviving piece of the Megamycete has been recovered and is currently being stored at a BSAA facility. Rose touches the fragment and uses her abilities to link her mind with the stored memories of the root and access its realm of consciousness in order to find a purifying crystal that has the power to remove the mold's influence from Rose's body. Right out of the gate, this DLC jumps off into the deep end, but Shadows of Rose's odd and unexpected premise is, at the very least, unique and sets it apart from every other Resident Evil story I've played through. It's also fascinating revisiting locations from the base game, just warped versions of them within this horrifying dreamscape. As Rose, you navigate your way through the late Lady Dimitrescu's castle, which is filled with bubbling black mold. Exploring it in a third-person perspective was a nice change of pace, though honestly, I think this game and its predecessor, RE7, work better in first person. The Winters expansion added in the option to play through the main game of RE8 as Ethan in third person as well, but I don't think it would be as effective as how it was originally intended to be presented in first person. The Shadows of Rose DLC is fine, but I don't have any interest in playing through the main game in this perspective. I like that Ethan's face was always concealed during gameplay and cutscenes. It made the experience feel more personal, intimate. What he looked like was never important. Instead of taking on Lycans and Lords, Rose has to do battle with creepy pale mold monsters called Face Eaters that suck the flesh from her bones if they get too close. It kinda looks like Play-Doh. On top of the various guns and explosives in your arsenal, you can also use Rose's powers to destroy mold cores to clear out pathways. There are a few interesting puzzles that use this mechanic. Her abilities can also be used offensively to slow down and stun enemies, allowing you to move past them, provide an opening to attack with stronger weapons, or counter their grabs with a direct close-range blast, replacing the tried-and-tested knife. These slowdown powers remind me a lot of the stasis module from Dead Space, and function very similarly to it during combat. Rose's Megamycete abilities are restored using White Sage, and the amount of nodes at your disposal increases as you find upgrades for it. The Face Eaters are all being controlled by a twisted version of the Duke, wearing a silver mask with 4 eye holes and black splotches in it. He and his creatures stand in your way of finding the purifying crystal. In my review of the base game, I mentioned that I found it to be rather easy on the standard difficulty, despite its adaptive difficulty, sending more resources your way if you're struggling, or holding back on them if you are plowing through things. I found the dropped and hidden treasures to still be bountiful, and the frequent visits you could make to the merchant allowed you to earn quick cash, restock on any necessary supplies, and upgrade your weapons. In Shadows of Rose, the ebb and flow of everything was far more noticeable and rewarding. There were a few encounters that had me hanging on by the skin of my teeth. I think the toughest was that dungeon fight with waves of enemies coming at you in such an enclosed space. The Duke even sends in a few of those larger executioner-style guys that have multiple faces poking out of them, screaming in agony. I think I took the last one down with only a couple bullets to spare. It was tense, bled me white. After the castle, Rose falls even deeper into the Megamycedes realm of consciousness, entering House Beneviento as her father once did all those years ago. This made me stop for a second, feeling very hesitant and unnerved. After all, this is the same place you encounter that terrifying fetus monstrosity during the main story, the physical embodiment of Ethan's fears and guilt surrounding the loss of his daughter. In my experience, it's one of the most blood-curdling sequences in the entire Resident Evil franchise. I was relieved to discover that there was no baby this time around, but rather equally disturbing wooden mannequins of Rose's mother, who chase you down as you maneuver yourself through the rooms and hallways of the old house. They remain motionless when you look at them, but if you dare turn away or have your line of sight blocked, they will charge and stumble towards you. It starts off pretty tame with a single mannequin, but quickly expands to several. When that happens, your heart sinks in your chest. It becomes trial and error finding the right path to take. Just when you think you are in the clear, you'll get flanked by one of the mannequins running through an extra door or hallway you failed to see. It's slow-paced, but incredibly tense. Your time in House Beneviento in the last half of the Shadows of Rose DLC mirrors the time you spend in it during the main game, in that it's less about the combat and more about instilling visceral psychological terror in the player. There's a deeper meaning behind a lot of the things you do and see within the dilapidated house. Calling Rose's childhood traumatic would be an understatement. She is forced to find several dolls of children she knew when she was younger, and relive cruel memories of bullying she experienced at school due to her powers. The children laughed at the gross white substance her body would secrete. They even burned her at the stake like a witch. Sadly, Rose had no friends to turn to growing up, which makes the absence of her mother and father now all the more upsetting. Eventually, Rose herself would become miniaturized to the size of one of the dolls, representing her feelings of isolation. I like how the game shifts into stealth, with you having to sneak past the other dolls and avoid their gaze. You also have to steer clear of another mannequin of Mia that stomps around in the kitchen. As much fun as the House Beneviento section is, I love the dark visuals in it, the perspective of being small in the stealth areas is neat, and exploring the tragic themes surrounding Rose's childhood is interesting. I do admit that this section doesn't feel as meaningful as it did in the base game. With the entirety of Shadows of Rose taking place in a metaphysical plane of existence, one that features locations and characters Rose has no significant prior attachment to, the stakes don't feel as high in this DLC as they do in the main story set in the real world, and it's something that was on my mind the entire time, taking me out of everything a little bit. The Masked Duke feels like an inconsequential hurdle that disappears after you leave the castle. Same goes with Evelyn in House Beneviento. Their inclusions are cool, but they're just characters that have been recycled without any strong connective tissue backing it up. Shadows of Rose is still a lot of fun, has some genuinely frightening moments in it, but compared to a lot of other story content in the Resident Evil series, it feels very disposable in the end. It's like a literal nightmare you and the character you're playing as wake up from and mostly forget a few hours later. Throughout your journey within the Megamycedes' sticky soup of memories, Rose is nudged along by a mysterious force, writing messages to her on various surfaces, even materializing useful supplies like weapons, ammo, and upgrades for her. Rose believes it's some sort of guardian angel watching over her, so she starts referring to it as Michael. I assumed Michael would be revealed as Ethan, and that's exactly what happened. It was very predictable. I liked that Michael had promised to be by her side through thick and thin. There was a heavier undertone to what he was doing, and it was heartwarming that someone or something was acting as a friend for Rose, the kind she's always wanted. But I feel from a writing standpoint, not telling Rose Michael's true identity from the start was needlessly deceptive and contrived. It also meant that we missed out on exploring their father-daughter relationship more. It would have been nice to see them interact in that way, without a cheap veil concealing one of them most of the time. Ethan helps Rose find the purifying crystal, and she uses it to get rid of her powers and finally become human. The surviving consciousness of Mother Miranda would take form, and we would come to understand that all of this had been a ruse to revive her daughter Eva, with Rose's depowered consciousness acting as her vessel. Ethan attempts to nobly sacrifice himself to defeat Miranda again, so Rose can escape. But Rose chooses to stay and save her father. She breaks open the purifying crystal, which not only restores her powers, but gives her additional ones as well. The battle with Miranda here feels very epic, and I actually enjoy it a little bit more than I do the one you have with her at the end of RE8, just because it's not as drawn out, and you have access to awesome abilities like a dash move, and a powerful attack using the mold to help even the odds against her. I found the ending of Shadows of Rose to be very underwhelming though, and I don't think it wrapped up the Winters arc of the Resident Evil franchise very strongly. Rose defeats Miranda, and a weakened Ethan looks to be dying in her arms. He tells her that he loves Rose, and is proud of her. Rose responds by saying "I love you" back, and then finds herself waking up in reality. Capcom has stated that the Winters Saga is officially over, and Rose will not be returning in Resident Evil 9. Problem is, after completing this DLC, I am still left with so many questions. Is Mother Miranda really dead this time? Is the Megamycete and the rest of the mold gone forever? What actually happened to Rose's mother? What was wrong with their relationship that led to those nightmares in the realm of consciousness? Because it seemed like everything was fine between them. I'd like to know where Mia is, and what she has been doing since she essentially handed Rose over to Chris for protection. And what about Ethan? What's his deal? Does he still exist in some capacity somewhere? The final moments of the DLC before it cuts to black are exactly the same as the teaser for it at the end of the main game. Rose pays her respects at her father's grave, leaves in an SUV with an agent, and an unknown figure who we now know to be Ethan approaches them further down the road as the vehicle stops. Maybe he is just there metaphorically. His spirit will always be with his daughter, watching over her, but still, I have no real idea of what Shadows of Rose was trying to accomplish with its story. It's like it ran in a complete circle, and we find ourselves back where we started. It's frustrating. Issues with the narrative aside, I did still enjoy playing through Resident Evil Village's Shadows of Rose DLC. I think playing as a teenage Rose with her mold powers was interesting. Getting to explore Dimitrescu Castle again was cool, and the psychological stuff in House Beneviento was a lot of fun, the standout section being the one with the mannequins of Rose's mother Mia. But I do think as a complete package, this story expansion is really disposable, and doesn't add a whole lot more to the ending of Resident Evil 8, surprisingly. I think it had a lot more untapped potential, and could have felt far more definitive than it did. Let me know your thoughts on the DLC and its story down in the comments section below. I want to thank you for watching this review, the latest in my Resident Evil retrospective series. If you'd like to support my content and ensure more of it can be created in the future, please subscribe, hit that bell icon for notifications, and become a producer over on patreon.com if you can. Help me keep the lights on with this channel. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.